I'm Edwin Ellis, and this is an overview of one of the modules in an overall course that uses a series of differentiated visual tools specifically designed for teaching specific Common Core standards for reading literature, reading information text, writing, listening and speaking, and researching. This was designed by Vicki Ricketts, a colleague, and myself. And this first module focuses on a series of DVD resources for the most dangerous game. But before we get into those resources, what I want to do is just take a moment and give you the bigger picture of what the design of the overall course. Basically, the course consists of 4 major units. In the first unit, we focus on short stories and articles that are, of course, information text and poems. In Unit 2, we're going to be focusing on short novels and plays and some parallel information text. In Unit 3, we're going to focus on full-blown novels and parallel information text, some lyrics and poems. And then finally in Unit 4, the focus is on budding authors. So essentially in Unit 1, we're going to start off with the most dangerous game, which is of course the focus of what this overview is. But then after we've read and analyzed and talked and written about the most dangerous game, we're going to move on to some information text. And this particular one more or less parallels the most dangerous game in that we're going to be reading an article that was published by PETA called Looking into a Hunter's Heart. And as you can guess, if you're familiar with PETA, they certainly have their opinions about hunting. And so that article really presents some pretty clear examples of author bias. And so we're going to be examining that article for evidence of author bias and some other kinds of things that parallel some of the more complex standards associated with reading information text. And so as you'll see, these series of short stories and parallel information text articles are sort of sistered up. And so we then read The Monkey's Paw, which of course is steeped in superstition. And then we're going to read some articles about superstition in today's world. And of course all of this involves literary analysis and content analysis and things of that nature and writing about it. Then we move on to The Scarlet Ibis, and then parallel information text. There's an article called My Brother Share Ya. Next, we're going to read that classic poem, The Raven, as well as some more contemporary poetry and analyze those. In Unit 2, when we move to short novels, we'll be reading the Odyssey and analyzing and writing about that. And then the parallel text, Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. And then we'll move on to Romeo and Juliet, as well as read some contemporary articles about preventing teen suicide. In Unit 3, we move to full-blown novels and some parallel information text and some lyrics and poetry. So the primary novel is To Kill a Mockingbird. And in the context of reading To Kill a Mockingbird, we're also going to be reading some parallel information text like the letter from the Birmingham jail by, of course, Martin Luther King Jr., and we're going to be listening to some tunes by Sam Cooke, including A Change Is Going to Come, and we're going to be analyzing those lyrics and some other kinds of pretty cool experiences, but all dealing with parallel information text. And finally, in Unit 4, Budding Authors, we're not going to be reading any more literature or information text, but rather the whole focus now shifts to having students engage in some research and composing their own articles and essays on contemporary issue, as well as writing some fiction and poems. So we're going to be focusing first, the first module in the overall course is focusing on the most dangerous game. And so what I'm going to do is sort of walk you through the instructional resources associated with that. If you're watching this video, that means you've already clicked on the overview video, and of course that's what we're watching now. But to kind of give you a sense of how this overall thing has been designed, for starters, if you click on the MDG text, that basically gives you a hyperlink over to the actual short story, The Most Dangerous Game. And so this can be emailed to students because it's a PDF file, so they can read it and they don't have to buy a book and that sort of thing. Likewise, once you click on menu, it'll take you back to the main menu. And then the next item is the calendar. And so what we've done is sort of scoped out a more or less estimated scope and sequence of the various activities that involve the most dangerous game that are stretched over a 2-week period. And so for each day, we've identified specific activities that we suggest you do and an estimate of how much time It'll take, now of course none of this is etched in stone. Some teachers may move through this more quickly and others more slowly, and of course that's going to depend on their students. The chances are the first time you teach this, it'll take you longer than you might later on, because the first time through you're as much the learner in terms of how to use these as your students will be. But keep in mind, as you become more familiar with these techniques and the visuals and so forth, your instruction is probably going to go much more quickly. Also on this same page, what we have, and of course this is a picture of the main menu, but what we've done on this same page is added some brief descriptions of the major activities that are associated with each of those various DVTs. So more or less at a glance you can get a sense of the big picture of what you'll be doing over the course of those 2 weeks. If you click on Standards, this is a list of the primary Common Core Language Arts standards that are targeted in this module. We'll be redressing those standards in just a little bit, but this is sort of the master list. So if you click on Menu, and then we click on Stratagem. So each one of these DVTs has a basic stratagem, which is sort of like an elaborated lesson plan, plus access to a variety of resources that you can use. So for an example, on setting the stage, which is the first stratagem that we'll be targeting, there are a variety of resources here. And so across the top are links or hyperlinks to various instructional resources that you can use while implementing the stratagem. So what I'm going to do is just sort of briefly walk you through these to kind of give you a sense of what you'll find in each of the various stratagems. We're just using the setting the stage as an example. So for an example, this first stratagem is all about setting the stage in terms of activating students' background knowledge and providing them some background information that they may need to better understand the context in which the story takes place and so forth. And so to start with, we are going to focus on a short video that gives students a context of the point in time when the story takes place. So if you click on video, what will open up is a video that basically lays out a timeline for students. And this is designed within the context of giving a sense of when the students were born, their parents were born, grandparents and great-grandparents, just to kind of give them a scope or a sense of the overall length back in time that we're going. And then we also contextualize this with some major events that they're probably going to be familiar with and so forth. And I'm not going to walk you through the whole video here, but you kind of get a sense of the direction we're going. And so basically what we're giving them a sense of is when this book was published and what was happening in history at the time it was published. And if you're familiar with The Most Dangerous Game, then you know this happened right after the Russian Revolution. So this video includes some basic information about what happened during that revolution and why people escaped, some down to a Caribbean island. So looking at some other resources here, this is a link to a YouTube video that actually has the entire movie version of it. This was in 1932. Don't recommend you watch the whole movie, but what we will be doing is watching about the first 6 minutes of the movie, up until the point where this sort of notorious quote emerges. The world is made up of 2 classes, the hunters and the hunted. And so what we'll be doing with a lot of the activities that come sort of center around this quote and so forth. And so we're watching the opening of the movie to just kind of set the stage and creating anticipation for reading the story. Next, we're going to move into something called a team dialogue. And so there's a series of resources here. There's a PowerPoint of the differentiated visual tool, or DVT, a sample of how it looks when it's been completed, and an interactive template. So I'm going to sort of walk you through this a little bit. So if you click on PowerPoint, what opens up is a PowerPoint slide that basically unpacks the DVT for students. So you can use this to explain to students each of the components of it. And what students will be doing during this team dialogue is they'll take this quote, the world is made up of 2 classes, the hunter and hunted, and they basically form a reaction. They're working in teams, and so what's their reaction to that quote? And then they identify reasons and supporting details that explains the reaction, and another reason they had that reaction, and then they draw a conclusion. Now this is sort of forming the basis for a number of other visuals that come as the course unfolds, where we're gradually building argumentative writing skills and things of that nature. So this is sort of a starting point. If you click on sample, what will open up is a version of that DVD that illustrates how it might look once it's been completed. Now, you might not show this sample to students per se, but it does give you a good idea of sort of the direction you want to take students in. So all of these DVTs in this program has samples of how they look once they're completed that you can sort of use as your guide on the side when you're teaching. Likewise, there are a series of interactive templates. And so, for an example, there's a template for this team dialogue, which is basically an interactive PDF file. And it's blacklined, so if you wish, you can print these out as handouts for students. But also, because they're interactive PDF files, that means that students can type on these, and so they can complete these independently on laptops or tablets. So for an example, you can email these as attachments to students so they can finish assignments. And so these are hyperlinked text boxes, so they can basically click and type the information on them, then save them and then email them back to you. Another thing that you're going to find throughout the various stratagems are links to various assessment resources that we've designed to go with the other things that you've been doing while you're implementing that stratagem. And that comes in the form of a PowerPoint, a sample, and an interactive template as well. So for an example, if you click on the PowerPoint, this is an example of the rubric. And as I'm sure you're aware, it's always a good idea to go over the rubric for an assignment before students do the assignment so they have a sense of what the expectations are and so forth. In this particular activity, students are going to be self-assessing how well they did in the team dialogue. And so they'll come up with their own evaluation score based on the rubric and identify what they did best as well as what they need to improve. So each of the various resources throughout these different stratagems will have various assessment tools that are sort of built in all along the way. So if we click on menu, we'll get back to that main page. Now, each of the stratagems will have, we've identified the core standard that this stratagem is designed to address. This particular one really just addresses one of those core standards, and it's about initiating and participating in group discussions about topics, texts, and issues being studied in class. But some of the other stratagems, you may find 3 or 4 different standards listed because there will be multiple standards that we're addressing as we move into this a little deeper. Likewise, each of the stratagems, we've identified an essential question or two. These questions focus on either a topic, like the theme of the story, or they also address specific tools or learning tools. So for an example, we'll have students evaluate some of these DVTs and have them think about different ways that they could use it in the context of taking notes or using them in other courses and other subjects like science and history and so forth. The next thing you'll find in the stratagem is a quick start guide, and this is sort of prose that's designed to kind of capture the essence of the overall big picture of what happens in a stratagem, this particular one. So if you're a seasoned expert teacher, probably all you're going to need to do is read this quick start to give you a sense of what happens when you implement this stratagem, and then you can just go for it. However, some teachers will need more specific instructions than sort of the bigger picture guide. So we've also provided in each stratagem a series of step-by-step instructions or a guide. This basically reads like a recipe. And it's organized around things to do to get ready to implement the stratagem, get set in terms of providing students with an advanced organizer, go, specific things to do while you're implementing the stratagem, and then finally finish, things to do at the end of that particular lesson in order to bring closure or do assessments and things of that nature. So each of the stratagems is organized around get ready, get set, go, and then finish. One of the things that you'll also notice once you get into this is that there's a basic sort of generative instructional paradigm that we use in all of these stratagems, and basically it's a 2-phase process. In phase one, the notion is what we're going to be doing is collecting ideas. And these can be ideas from the text we're reading, or they can be from media that we're watching. They may be from class discussions. So there can be a number of sources for the ideas, and we're going to be converting those ideas to notes on these DVTs. Then in phase two, we're going to be taking those notes and then elaborating on them. So elaboration can come in several different ways. One is students will be taking those notes and then verbally explaining those ideas to others. And so just the practice of verbally explaining the information will cause them to remember and analyze it and think about it in much deeper ways. Likewise, we'll also be using the notes on the DVTs to elaborate on those ideas in writing. So basically with this two-phase process, we go from ideas to notes to elaboration.